So what is a hypothesis? Well, this question, of course, doesn't sound especially profound. Presumably you know that a hypothesis is just a prediction of what the results of a study will show. But to illustrate, suppose you want to conduct a study on how to improve creativity. Now, one set of participants are asked to imagine their life 10 years in the future, and another set of participants are asked to imagine their life tomorrow. And next, everyone completes some sort of test of creativity, such as specifying as many uses of a brick as they can. Now, for this study, the hypothesis might be that participants who imagine their life 10 years in the future might outperform the other participants on creativity. That is, you might predict that imagining your life 10 years in the future enhances creativity. So why then do we need to discuss the concept of hypothesis? I mean, the concept seems really straightforward. Well, actually two complications arise. First, people often misconstrue the purpose of hypotheses. Specifically, the purpose of a hypothesis is to test some theory or explanation. So to illustrate, consider a notion called Construe level theory. According to this theory, when people imagine their future, they can't be sure of which details will be relevant. For example, they can't be certain of whether people will tend to wear blue jeans or grey jeans. So naturally, their attention is not oriented towards specific details. Instead, their attention is oriented towards broader concepts such as clothes rather than blue jeans. And interestingly, whenever people consider these broader concepts, their creativity improves. So to demonstrate why, people contemplate broad concepts like clothes, that primes a whole lot of specific examples such as red shorts, blue skirts and so forth. And because so many examples are primed, the likelihood that one of these examples could solve some problem actually increases. So if this theory is true, after people contemplate the future, perhaps 10 years from now, we predict these individuals shall be more creative. That is, and we also predict these individuals shall also refer to broader concepts such as clothes rather than specific details such as a red dress when describing objects or events. And these predictions are obviously the hypotheses. And obviously if the hypotheses are rejected, we must discard or modify our theory or explanation. If the hypotheses are supported, we can be more certain, but not sure, our theory or explanation is accurate. So a hypothesis is really a prediction derived from a theory or explanation designed to test this theory or explanation. But importantly, a hypothesis is not just your personal expectation based on your reading or experience. For example, you can't write, I hypothesize that contemplating the future will not enhance creativity because nothing in my life ever works out, so this study will probably fail as well. Right? That's just a personal explanation. It's not a prediction derived from a specific theory or explanation. The second complication is that people often formulate inappropriate or untestable hypotheses because an effective hypothesis needs to comprise four features, which I'll describe now. So first, the hypothesis must be derived from one theory or explanation, as I already said. Indeed, one study can present two competing hypotheses derived from different theories. Second, the hypothesis must predict a significant difference or relationship. So to illustrate, consider the hypothesis that people who contemplate the distant future will outperform people who contemplate only the next day in creativity. Well, this hypothesis does predict a difference between the two groups of participants and is thus acceptable. Now consider the hypothesis, people who contemplate the distant future and people who contemplate the next day will not differ in creativity. Well, this hypothesis predicts no difference between the two groups of participants and is thus not acceptable. But why not? Well, the reason will become clearer later, but the problem is that no statistical test has been developed to convincingly demonstrate no difference between groups or no relationship between variables. That is, instead, statistical tests can more convincingly demonstrate a difference between groups or demonstrate a relationship between variables. Third, the hypothesis should specify the direction of this difference or relationship. So to illustrate, consider the hypothesis, people who contemplate the distant future will outperform people who contemplate the next day in creativity. Well, this hypothesis indicated which group of participants should be most creative and is thus acceptable. In contrast, consider the hypothesis, people who contemplate the distant future will differ in creativity to people who contemplate the next day. Well, this hypothesis does not indicate which group of participants should be the most creative, is thus unacceptable because it's not really quite as testable or compelling. And finally, hypotheses should be specific enough to be testable. I think the hypothesis in this case should probably refer to creativity in particular, rather than, for example, just performance in general, which is just too broad to test.